Like in Egypt, you've got the god of bricks, you got the god of lovemaking, you got the god of beer.
Those gods knew how to party.
Yeah, you got your bricks, you got your beer, you got your lovemaking, and you've got a weekend.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan.
And I'm Dan Beecher.
And you are listening to the Data Over Dogma podcast, where we increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion, and we combat the spread of misinformation about the same. We got a hot one today, don't we?
Ooh, we're like coming off the heels of some current events.
We're getting topical.
We are,
right.
we try. We're maybe a couple weeks late, but it's okay.
Like an effective cream, today we're topical. We're going to be talking about recent legislation that was signed into law by the governor of Louisiana.
Yeah.
HB 71, House Bill 71, which requires that all public school classrooms have prominently posted a specific version of the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit about what specific version they're using and why, and then get into some of these commandments, how they're written up, why it's a little confusing, and then talk a little more about some of these commandments, and then move on to some Name of God stuff. Just an average Thursday.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be
Monday, whatever. I don't know when you're listening to this.
Yeah, you listen whenever you listen. It's Thursday for us, but time is a flat circle, so none of it makes any sense. All right, well let's dive in to this. Louisiana has, as you say, chosen to try to force all of the schools to have the Ten Commandments on a poster in every classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Feels a little weird. Definitely problematic. I think
problematic
and controversial.
Yeah.
So
and this has been tried in a bunch of states.
Yeah.
Texas tried it recently. Here in Utah, they tried it and it didn't get passed. And this ought to strike most people as a pretty flagrant violation of the Establishment Clause of the very first amendment to the Constitution. And we're going to get into that. But shall we just kind of, I want to read one of the paragraphs that introduces the Ten Commandments, and then we can read through. Does that sound okay?
I love it.
Okay. So paragraph, line 11 on page 3 of the final form of this bill that was signed into law. No later than January 1, 2025, each public school governing authority shall display the Ten Commandments in each classroom in each school under its jurisdiction. The nature of the display shall be determined by each governing authority, with a minimum requirement that the Ten Commandments shall be displayed on a poster or framed document that is at least 11 inches by 14 inches. The text of the Ten Commandments shall be the central focus of the poster or framed document and shall be printed in a large, easily readable font. The text shall read as follows. And then
it starts with the Ten Commandments. That's the first bit of text that you have to have on there.
Yeah.
Which I think should probably be read only in your best Charlton Heston impression.
When I think Charlton Heston, I think of Wayne's World.
Oh.
Because I never watched the movie, The Ten Commandments.
Really?
Never seen it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Cecil B. DeMille is rolling in his grave.
Well, he can roll around all he wants. I just have I was not raised in a religious household. It was just never a movie that we watched, and so I know I'm a heretic already to a lot of people out there, but that makes me even more heretical. So that's the movie that I first saw Charlton Heston in. I was like, what? Okay, this guy's a much better actor than the first guy that they had in the gas station, but I don't get the significance. And then later on, I was like, okay.
He's Moses.
Yeah.
I am the Lord thy God. That's my best Heston right now. Which is also the next few words in the commandments. Should we go through? I mean, I don't know. We don't need to read all of the Ten Commandments.
Okay.
But the point is, or at least one of the points for the purposes of this conversation, is that they chose very specific translation, a very specific version of these, because different translations of the Bible do these differently, word these differently.
Yeah, there are a bunch of different ways to understand the Ten Commandments. We've already done a show where we talked about the fact that Exodus 20 is not labeled the 10 Commandments. It's actually Exodus 34 where we have the 10 things, the 10 words, the 10 Commandments, but that's the ritual decalogue. This is a different set of 10. So we've discussed that, but the specific
and also,
version...
it's not only is it not labeled as 10 Commandments, it's not numbered either. Like, and there's vast disagreement on which are the 10, and it's very reasonable to say there are not 10. Yeah. You could number it at as few as 9 easily, or as many as 12. Like, that it's not obvious in any way that this is supposed to be 10 different commandments.
Yeah, this is a negotiation of the text. This is our decision to impose that organizing framework, but you can even organize it different ways. You can split the commandments up in different ways. Some people think of you shall not covet your neighbor's house as one commandment, and then you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or slaves as a separate commandment.
Sure.
The first commandment can be split up in a variety of different ways. Is the statement, I am the Lord your God, a commandment? Within most Jewish streams of tradition, that is considered the first commandment. But within most Christian traditions, it's the actual proscriptive, you shall have no other gods before me. And is the commandment to not make any graven images, is that part of the same commandment? Is that a separate? So there are a lot of different ways to do this, and this legislation is prescribing a very specific way to do it to some degree, because it doesn't number them like you were saying before we started recording. You could even divide up the laws, the commandments as they're represented in the bill to 12.
Yeah,
like
absolutely. It looks like 12
lines
to me when I read it, because they do have line breaks, and a couple of them extend beyond the line breaks, and it's very obvious when that has happened. Right. And then but if you just go down and you don't count
sentence by sentence,
it looks like 12 different commandments to me.
Yeah, yeah. So that's unclear. So if somebody wanted to thumb the nose at this legislation, they could number them by 12 or something.
And they definitely should thumb the nose at this legislation. Yeah. It's true.
But the reason that they have picked the version that they have and the specific translation that they have, because you will not find this exact list of commandments in any translation. This comes from a document that was created in the 1950s by the Fraternal Order of Eagles. And this is not Don Henley fans. This is a charitable
order. The Eagles, man.
That's the only part of that movie I don't like. It's funny, but I'm like, you have lost points.
You're like, the dude doesn't like the Eagles. You're telling me the dude doesn't like the Eagles.
Now, I will be clear. I prefer CCR over the Eagles, but I do love me some Eagles. Now, this is a charitable organization that does a lot of good work. But back in the 50s, they were involved, like a lot of people, in red baiting, in the Red Scare. We had a lot of communism is destroying the world. We need to develop kind of an identity that distinguishes us from the Ruskies.
Yeah.
And so one of the main thing that kind of took over U.S. identity was this idea that they are godless communists and we are godful. I don't know.
God-fearing.
God-fearing, yes. We are the Theosebis. We are we follow the commandments of God. And so there was this push to consider the 10 Commandments an identity marker.
Right.
Now, it had never been an identity marker prior to that time period. There is an argument that sits at the foundation of our nation's heritage and its laws, all entirely false.
Right.
There is absolutely no case to make that the Ten Commandments sit at the foundation of any our laws or our nation in general. Sure, the Bible does. Sure, even the King James Version of the Bible does. Sure, the Ten Commandments are something that appear in like old spelling books from the 19th century.
Right.
Sure. That does not a foundation make.
Well, and this bill actually references a couple of textbooks and just and in language that's meant to also go on these posters.
Yeah.
It says, the Ten Commandments was in this book and the Ten Commandments was in that book, and it makes it sound like every child in school for the entire history of the United States has had to read these words and blah blah blah. And that's just silly.
Yeah, it's nonsense. But in the 50s, Cecil B. DeMille and the Fraternal Order of Eagles hooked up and decided that they were going to produce these big kind of monumental displays of the Ten Commandments,
right,
and distribute them throughout the country to put like next to your Capitol building or your courthouses and stuff like that. And so you had a bunch of these go up,
right? And for DeMille, it was just like it was publicity for his movie.
Well, and he was also very much he would have been a McCarthy stan. Right. He was also very anti-communist, so I'm sure this was personal for him as well. But it was mainly going to be publicity for his movie.
Yeah.
And so they go up all over the place, and then I think it's 2003, somebody sues because one of these, I think it might have been the one in Texas. I don't remember where, but sues saying this violates the Establishment Clause.
Right.
Because this is establishing a religion. And there was a big flurry of activity, and most of them were just kind of like, off in a park. Nobody cared about it. They don't even make an association between this thing and a government building.
Right.
And then we get this ruling in 2005, Van Orden versus Perry, where and this actually is released the same day as another ruling about the display of the Ten Commandments in public spaces that ruled the other way. So we got two rulings, each of them 5-4, going in opposite directions, and it was I think it was Breyer who was the one who was the deciding vote. But they said the display in Texas is good. This can stay. This does not violate the Establishment Clause. But a bunch of other displays, I think in Kentucky or somewhere around there, they violate the Establishment Clause. And part of it was because it was a part of a bunch of displays, and they were asserting this, the Ten Commandments are the foundation of our legal system and of our nation, just kind of reflecting that 1950s era, that ethos.
Right.
And they get rejected. And so, and that was McCreary County versus ACLU. And so we've got a version of the Ten Commandments that passes constitutional muster, and we've got other versions of the Ten Commandments that don't. The version of the Ten Commandments that Louisiana put up is identical to the version in Texas that passed, which is from the 1950s era.
And I think that there were, I don't remember this well, but I think that there were other issues at play as to why they allowed the Texas one to stand, including they claimed that it had been there for so long and no one had complained about it for so long that it now had sort of a traditional standing.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So it wasn't just the wording that was important, but you're right that the lawmakers in Louisiana grabbed onto the wording as being like, well, if it's okay there, then it must be fine here.
Yeah, because the goal here is to get something up to the Supreme Court. Like the reason they're doing this is so they can get it to the Supreme Court, and they have precedents because it's already passed once. But the interesting thing is in the McCreary case, one of the things that they cited in rejecting the other displays was what's called the Lemon test, which goes back to 1971, Lemon versus Kurtzman, this is another Establishment Clause case, but they established a 3-pronged test to determine if something violates the Establishment Clause. The purpose prong, it says the statute must have a secular legislative purpose. The effect prong, the principal or primary effect of the statute must neither advance nor inhibit religion. And the entanglement prong, the statute must not result in an excessive government entanglement with religion. And so that's been what's kind of governed Establishment Clause cases evidently ever since in the Supreme Court.
Right.
Until
Skun-dun-dun.
2 years ago,
Yeah.
when we had Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. This is the football coach who prays after the games in the middle of the field, and got his contract was not renewed by the school, and he sued. And this went up to our justices, and as with so many things recently, it's a 6-3 ruling. We know what that means.
Yeah.
And in this ruling, they basically said, we don't care about the Lemon test. Our test is tradition. If it's a part of our nation's tradition, then fair game. And I'm simplifying quite a bit, but more or less the main test that the main piece of scrutiny that it has to pass now is just whether or not it is an established part of American tradition.
I mean, but these justices go against that all the time too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these justices, the only test that they care about is what are my personal feelings about this.
Yeah,
I mean, you get people like Alito and Thomas, and it's just they don't care. They say that they're originalists, but they don't really care at all what the founding fathers had to say.
No.
They say that they are, that they're like literally. This is a very strange assortment of judges that's currently on our bench.
A majority of our Supreme Court justices right now are Catholic.
Yeah.
Like a lot of them, which is weird because this is also a very Protestant version of the Ten Commandments that has been approved, and what I hear from lawyers, to my knowledge, neither of us are lawyers.
I haven't checked recently, but yes, last time I checked, I wasn't a lawyer.
Yeah, my insurance won't pay for the test right now, but to my knowledge, I'm not a lawyer. But people who are lawyers, who know a lot more about the law, and particularly constitutional law, than I, have said that in light of the basically abolition of the Lemon test, when this makes it to the Supreme Court, unless something drastic changes, it's going to be 6-3 in favor of this. So, which means that Utah, Texas, 30 other states tomorrow are going to suddenly have the same legislation.
Yeah. So let's talk about these commandments a little bit. I think we're all sort of somewhat familiar with them. I think these I think they should have done the Colbert check on all of the legislators who co-signed on this bill to say, hey, can you name all 10 of the 10 commandments? Because they can't.
I want to tell you a story. The first time I ever went to General Conference.
This is LDS Church.
LDS General Conference. Yeah, this is every 6 months they have this big meeting. I think this was a special treat. Like I traveled to Utah. It was before I left on a mission. I was crossing the street to go into the recently built conference center.
Right.
And there was one of the street preachers on the corner challenging people to recite the 10 Commandments. And at the time I was like, I don't know. And ever since then I've been like, I want to go back and see if that guy's there.
There's always somebody protesting out there. And it's always, it's very funny because it's always someone of a different denomination, Christian, but like, why are you protesting this? Anyway, it's all very weird. These are they not King Jamesian in their wording?
Remarkably King Jamesian with small divergences.
Okay.
And that's what threw me off the first part, because I looked at it and I was like, yeah, that's King James. And then I looked it up and I was like, wait a minute. No, it's not. There are some small differences, but it is based on King James. So it's a revised King James.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I don't really understand the reason for the revisions. So for instance, one of them is, thou shalt not make to thyself any graven images.
Yeah.
But when we look in the King James, what we have is, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image.
Oh.
So we've gone from...
Kids don't know what the word thee means?
Well, but they know, to thyself.
Right, exactly.
Maybe they were like, we could say to thine own self. But then they've also changed it from the singular to the plural. Graven image has now been pluralized in here. And in the Hebrew, it is not plural, it is singular. It's just one word, pesel.
Can we talk a little bit about what that means? Because that is a very strange and confusing commandment. And I think most, I looked at different translations of it, and a lot of the newer translations, including the NRSV, they replace the words graven images with an idol. You shall not make for yourself an idol.
Yeah.
What does the original seem to be saying, and what are the sort of more common interpretations of it?
So pesel is a Hebrew word that refers to an image that has been crafted from wood or from stone. And so the graven image, the idea is it is an image that has been engraved, or a carved image or something like that. And you have in Judges 17, you have a story of Micaiah who makes a graven image, but I want to say it says a graven molten image. And so it's not clear if there's a process going on here, or if some people understand it as two different types of images. But yeah, it's an idol. So divine image would be the object that is the focus of worship, that is considered the index for the deity and their presence and all that kind of stuff. And usually these would be carved out of wood or carved out of stone, and then they would be covered in gold and silver, or they would be cast in gold and silver or something like that. A variety of different ways to make divine images, but that's fundamentally what we're referring to here.
But it does go on, like the verse goes on to say, and I'll read KJV right now, just because it says, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is that is in the water under the earth. So, and it goes on after that to say, thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. So that verse 5 indicates to me that yes, it's an idol or whatever, but it does seem like, when I look at, Islam has a prohibition against imagery, which is why when you go to like the Alhambra in Spain, you'll see really ornate writing, but no picture and a lot of
representative imagery.
Yeah, no representative. And I wonder if there was any of that prohibition of just representative imagery contained in this.
It was certainly understood that way, because you do have, it's not nearly as programmatic as within Islam, which comes from many centuries later, and develops within kind of a more philosophically oriented social environment. But you do have an omission of an awful lot of imagery. You don't really have you don't have much ancient artwork within Judaism depicting animals or other kinds of sentient beings. Now, the interesting thing, and the idea here is probably, we know that nations around us make divine images that look like people, that look like animals, whether swimming in the sea or flying through the air or walking on the land. So the idea is almost certainly, don't make images in order to worship. that look like anything that you might see running around.
Right. And we know that 5 minutes after this, he comes back down the mountain and there's a cow there that everybody's worshiping.
But and we do actually have from the lands of Israel and Palestine, from the end of the Bronze Age, beginning of the Iron Age, we have divine images that have been discovered, most of them miniature divine images, but we know that bulls and calves were one of the forms that was frequently used to represent deities, and almost certainly to represent Adonai, the God of Israel.
That's insane. That's not insane, but it's like very interesting that the Israelites in the Exodus story get in big trouble for a calf.
Yeah,
considering the fact that the calf/bull was used as a proxy for their God.
And you see it in other places throughout the Hebrew Bible. The fact that you have horns put on the incense altars and the sacrificial altar and things like that reflects this idea of a pedestal animal that is associated with Adonai. And you have the King James renders it mighty one of Jacob, but that's the word for bull, the bull of Jacob. And so there are a bunch of different vestigial relationships between Adonai and bull imagery, as well as El and bull imagery. And if you look in the Ugaritic literature and other Northwest Semitic literature, you see El and Baal, the storm deity, the Northwest Semitic counterpart to Adonai. You see both of them are represented with bulls as well. So this is probably coming from much later on, but it's a way to kind of create this blanket proscription that includes in it the prohibition of Adonai's pedestal animal and that kind of imagery. But it gets interpreted as don't have artwork that represents people or animals or things like that. So you don't really see it, apart from the commandment to put like cherubim on the curtains of the temple and stuff like that.
Right.
So it's not until you get down into the Greco-Roman period, around the turn of the era, around the time of Jesus's life, that you see a lot of like pomegranates and rosettes, and you see some other animals and plants and things represented in some imagery in synagogues and things like that.
I just, it's funny because thinking about how the next verse does talk about don't bow yourself down before it, to me takes the curse off of just, drawing a lamb or drawing a whatever. Yeah. But that gets me thinking about images that I see all the time of someone kneeling down in front of either a picture of Jesus or a candle of a saint or,
a crucifix
or anything and praying. It feels like that could run afoul of this graven images idea.
It certainly could, and you have a lot of people who, particularly Protestants and particularly evangelicals today, who accuse Catholics of violating these commandments all day and twice on Sunday,
right.
Because they understand, particularly the worship of Mary and images and things like that. But yeah. At the same time, the way that a lot of Protestants treat the Bible as the Word of God and hold it up as its own icon. Like there's plenty of scholarship out there talking about the Bible as icon, as a divine image. That could run afoul of this as well.
I mean, not for nothing, but you put a poster up in a classroom and, say that it has deep importance, that could easily be a graven image in this sense.
And particularly because it's functioning as an icon.
Yeah.
Like it's not functioning as a text. Like it's functioning as an icon, because even if you can't read it, you know what it is.
This is going into kindergarten classrooms. It's not like the kids are going to be going, adultery is probably a bad idea for me.
Yeah. Like once it's up there, you're going to have high school kids. They, in however many years until our legislatures grow up and get over these petty and naive identity politics. However long they're in classrooms, you're going to have high school kids who know exactly what's going to be there. They've read it a billion times, but they're not going to take it down. It's going to remain up there because it is a symbol, and it is a symbol of authority. And that's precisely what divine images are.
Yeah.
They're to remind you who's in charge, and they're to function as an index for that authority and for the presence of that authority. So in a lot of ways, it's functioning like a divine image.
I do love the idea of these things breaking their own commandments. I think that's brilliant.
So I want to just see some kind of fundamentalist who's just part of such a niche, like little tiny corner of American evangelicalism who tears it down and stomps on it like that doofus did for the Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple display in the one place because it's functioning that way.
I also wanted to talk a little bit. Sorry, you were going to do something.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to jump onto the thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. We will. That's going to eventually transition us to the second half of the show. But I wanted to talk about what it means, what that means, because I know growing up in my life, I had the idea that to take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, if I said, "Oh my God," like I thought that was what it meant to take the name of the Lord. I don't think that's what it means now.
No, that's not what it means. And I want to point something out as well. The official text, the language that has to be on there, I am the Lord thy God. I am is in all caps.
Right. Oh yeah, I hadn't caught that.
So they're trying to say the great I am.
Right.
They want to make note of that. However, in the text of Exodus 20, that's just Anochi, which is just the first person singular personal pronoun. It is not the phrase in Exodus 3 that is rendered I will be what I will be, or I am that I am, or something like that. So it's actually imposing that on the Hebrew, and it's not in the Hebrew.
And it's sneaky too, because it is a way of differentiating this God from, no one associates Allah with I am.
Yeah.
So it does feel like they're very clearly putting down a marker that this is the Christian or Jewish, I suppose, God, and not any other God. So you're not allowed in their minds to interpret I am the Lord thy God as being, this could be Shiva, or this could be, some other God.
And that comes from the original displays from the 1950s. They have both I am and Lord in all caps.
Right.
So that's an interesting
that's
an interesting thing to note. However, we get back to thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. The word here that is translated in vain is lashav. So for vain in Hebrew. And shav there is a word that means make it worthless, make it useless. That's basically what it is. So in vain is an okay translation.
Our word vain in this sense is like Shakespeare used it a lot and would say to go somewhere to do something in vain is to do it fruitlessly or without the right effect or something.
To no effect or something like that, right? And what is translated "thou shalt not take" is nasa, which means to lift, bear, or carry. And the idea here of lifting, bearing, or carrying the name in vain is almost certainly a reference to swearing an oath. That's how this is used elsewhere. In fact, we've got in Leviticus another commandment. I think it's Leviticus 19. I'll just verify real quick, but can't find it. But it's it says not to swear by the name of Adonai falsely.
Right.
For as a lie. And so that's almost certainly what's going on here. The idea being for an oath, an ordeal in court, whatever, don't lift your hand to the square and say God's name as part of an oath if that oath is false or if it's something that you promise to do that you're not going to carry through with.
Right.
And so it's really just saying,
don't invoke me and then forsake that. Or fudge.
Or if you're in court, so in court, you put your hand on the Bible or you raise your right hand and you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. That's a way to lift, bear, carry the name of God. There it's just the title of God. But if you're lying in your testimony in court, that would be directly a violation of that commandment.
Right.
Now, it became inappropriate to use the divine name at all shortly after this, probably in the Greco-Roman period.
Okay.
First century BCE.
Which is why don't say it on the podcast.
Yes, that's
because there are still people that hold to the idea.
Oh, absolutely, and a lot of friends of mine, and several of them have said if I would not mind making that accommodation, and that's not a costly accommodation for me. I'm used to hearing it in academic conferences and stuff like that. I'm fine with that. So around that time period, it became considered inappropriate. And my opinion on this, based on work that I've published, is that the divine name was considered a way to invoke God's presence and authority. Kind of like how in Russian, they don't say the actual Russian word for bear,
right,
because they're afraid the bear's going to show up or something like that. The idea being, you only invoke it. There's only one person who can say it in the Holy of Holies, because when you say it, God is invoked. And so to be outside the temple and to say it is to bring God into a profane context, and that would be considered inappropriate. And so I think it was probably that sensitivity, that taboo developed because the name was thought to invoke deity, which is probably why this tradition developed of not destroying texts that had the divine name on it. You had to use the geniza. Sometimes you buried the text. There were specific processes you went through to discard texts that had the divine name. And there were even debates that arose within Judaism when the internet became a thing, of typing the divine name on a screen that, would just go away. So it's something that was taken very seriously within Judaism. But once that happened, you can't bear the divine name anywhere. Right. And so what does this commandment mean? and I think that's probably when it got renegotiated to refer to other things. I think one of the things that one of the renegotiations was this idea that you bear the divine name when you represent the deity in public, in private, and in your dealings with your fellow man.
So would you say that, for instance, if you wanted to display a series of scripture, that would be an instance of maybe bearing the divine name, and if you were to do so under false pretenses, like let's say you claim that they are just historical and part
falsely
of
so,
then would that be perhaps bearing the name of the Lord in vain? I'm just just
spitballing here.
Yeah, examples in mind, just thinking about it.
That could certainly be, according to that renegotiation of the text, that could certainly be an example of bearing the divine name in vain. Yeah. If you're just using it to try to structure power, absolutely, that could be understood according to that renegotiation. And then it would be further renegotiated to be, any kind of use in an expletive of the word God or something like that. And which is, I think, how most people from our generation and generations around us were probably raised with this idea that you weren't supposed to use the word God or Lord or anything like that in expletives.
Right.
Even though there are ways that "Oh God" can be used devoutly.
Yeah.
But really, your inflection is the only thing. Like if you're in a prayer and you say, "Oh God," just a little bit wrong, it might come across
right.
as
And it's definitely not okay if you do it just after stubbing your toe.
yeah.
But then if you pray for healing, then it's okay. Yeah, the lines could get blurry.
And who knows? Maybe Genesis 38, Onan, maybe he let out an "Oh God," and that was really why God was like, zap.
Well, there you go. We're gonna have to. Have we done that story? We haven't. I don't know that we've ever done that story.
Did we not do Onan?
Maybe we did. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't remember. The second we record these things, I forget everything that we talked about. So, so let's talk. So, okay, I think it's interesting that they're putting these 10 commandments up. Since the first 4 or 5, depending on how you number it, of the commandments are about God.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, at least one of them is specifically about God's name. Let's talk about that name. Let's talk about the development of that name, where it came from, what's going on with that.
Yeah. So the first thing you need to know is that Jehovah begins with an I. If you ever find yourself in a life or death situation where you have to spell out the name of God, just keep that in mind. In the older Latin, Jehovah begins with an I.
We did a whole show about we talked about the Tetragrammaton some, but not sort of the development of it.
Oh yeah. So we've probably mentioned that the earliest known occurrence of the divine name, the Tetragrammaton, as a reference to the God of Israel, comes from probably the 3rd or 4th quarter of the 9th century BCE. So the Mesha inscription, where Mesha talks about carting away the vessels of Adonai after having defeated the nation of Israel at Nebo. And we got a couple references.
Sorry, we should just do a quick reminder that Tetragrammaton is a reference to 4 letters, Yod He Vav He, if I'm recalling correctly.
You recall correctly.
And that is the name of God. So you're saying that this thing was the first time we saw those letters in that order, in that reference,
as a reference to a deity. Okay. And then we also have most of the letters of the Tetragrammaton used in names in some other inscriptions. So the Teldan stele, which was probably written by an Aramean named Hazael, who's boasting about defeating a handful of kings, and they have Yahwistic theophoric elements in the name. And by the way, I say Adonai. Most scholars pronounce it Yahweh, and the name Jehovah is an alternate form of this based on the combination of the consonants Yod He Vav He and the vowels that come from the Hebrew word for my Lord, a special form of it, that's pronounced Adonai. If you put those two together and then you transliterate them into modern English, Yehovah or Jehovah is what you would get. So if you've ever wondered where the name Jehovah comes from, it comes from the combination of the consonants of Adonai, the consonants of Adonai and the vowels of Adonai, the consonants of the Tetragrammaton and the vowels of Adonai.
Of the word Adonai, right.
Yeah, and that probably happens in the medieval period in a couple of different languages and becomes very common. Because if we go look in the Masoretic text and if we look at ancient texts, they were already using those letters as substitutions for the divine name in ancient texts. So anyway, we've got Adonai, we've got Jehovah, we've got the Tetragrammaton, we've got the divine name. It first appears on the scene suddenly in the names of kings and in the name of the patron deity of Israel around 850, 825-ish BCE.
Like who? Give me some of these names that this is appearing.
Jehoram, Jehu, names like that. So the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III talks about Jehu, a king in Israel, and is actually the earliest artistic depiction of an actual known Israelite. It shows him bowing down to the ground in front of Shalmaneser III.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and I actually ran across this. I was in the British Museum last October, and I was just kind of looking around, and then whoa, it's right there in front of me. I was like, oh my gosh, Shalmaneser. So that was a fun experience. But then we don't have anything before that, and we have an inscription. We have the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah, who talks about a people known as Israel around 1208 BCE. So like over 300 years earlier than that, Israel is a people, but there's no indication that Adonai is their deity. But we can go back even further, deeper into the 1200s and even into the early 1300s BCE, and we have a couple of inscriptions in Egyptian on the sides of pillars that use three of those letters, Yod, He, Vav, and then like an Egyptian version of a glottal stop or an aleph or something like that, as a reference to either a people or a land that is associated with a group known as the Shasu. And this is an Egyptian term that probably refers to nomadic Asiatic peoples from West Asia, so down into Arabia, up further north, around the lands of Israel and Palestine and elsewhere. And they've got a bunch of lands listed, the Shasu of this land, the Shasu of that land, the Shasu of that land, and then they've got the Shasu of Yod He Vav, glottal stop, land. And so a lot of scholars think this, most scholars think this has some kind of relationship to the divine name. And so the question is, what's the exact relationship? And I think many scholars would say if there is a relationship, then whoever occupied this land or whoever bore this name probably named their deity after the land or the people, and at some point made their way into the northern hill country of Israel, bringing their deity with them, and introduced that deity into this Northwest Semitic group that was probably already devoted mainly to El, but also to other deities. And now we have the introduction of this deity known as Adonai, according to the way I pronounce it.
Right.
And they were probably inserted into the Pantheon on the second tier. They initially were one of the offspring of the high god, who was either El or Elyon or maybe Elohim. And they seem to have adopted a storm deity profile. It's very similar to Baal, who's already operating in the area, which is probably the reason that throughout the Hebrew Bible we keep having conflicts. Adonai and Baal keep butting heads, like with the challenge between the contest between Elijah and the prophets of Baal.
Would this have operated similarly to, when I hear about, ancient Greeks and how there were all of these gods, but, there would be a certain group, there would be some people who would just devote themselves, there would be a cult of this god or that god. Is that how this would have operated likely with these people? Is that there are sort of, there's the high god and then there's these other sort of lower individual gods that some people would go to, and there would be like maybe patron gods of a certain group or tribe or something?
Yeah, absolutely. There were all kinds of different deities and levels to the hierarchy, but they were also associated with different kinds of functions. Like in Egypt, you've got the god of bricks, you got the god of lovemaking, you got the god of beer,
right?
You got all these different kinds of gods who are thought to be.
Those gods knew how to party. That was a fun.
Yeah. You got your bricks, you got your beer, you got your lovemaking, and you've got a weekend.
Yeah,
and those gods were thought to like oversee those industries and the people associated with them. And so if you were a part of that guild, maybe that was, one of the main gods that you liked. If you were a wife and mother, maybe you were concerned with Asherah, because Asherah or Athirat in the Ugaritic text was associated with child rearing, with conception, with lactation, breastfeeding, and things like that. So, if you're having trouble getting an adequate latch, maybe you burn some incense to set up a votive offering to Asherah or Athirat or something like that. If you're going off to war, maybe you pour out a little extra for the whatever deity you want to watch over you in battle. And you also had ancestral deities in this time period.
Right,
you had great-granddaddy who passed away a long, long time ago, but, there's his mortuary chapel. We go in and we have a meal in front of his stele. We just talked about this recently.
Right.
The idea of the soul being in the stele. And so maybe you petitioned him for insight about something. I really want Jennifer to know how much I care about her and that I love her, and I just want her to notice that I exist. So you would go
that ancient
to
Hebrew name Jennifer, right?
Yeah, but you might go to the ancestral deity because they were more concerned for your well-being. The national deity, El, who was over the whole nation, didn't have time to worry about you.
Right.
And so, you went to whichever deity you thought was most likely to help you out in your specific circumstances. And so Adonai, I think, in my opinion, and in the opinion of some scholars, certainly not all scholars, but I think probably started out as an ancestral deity. Was probably this clan was probably named after or took their name from an ancestral deity who they had particular devotion to, and then they took it into Israel, and then this deity, for whatever reason, becomes a storm deity, and then gets into conflict with Baal, who wants to be the storm deity in the land, and at some point, either because maybe a king who is a devotee of Adonai rises to the throne, or maybe a king who's on the throne is like, those Adonai worshipers are becoming a significant factor. All the polling shows that they have, they exercise a lot of influence. Maybe they were like, let's take that deity and let's merge it together with El.
Right.
And El and Adonai become a single deity. And that's something that happened anciently as well. You see it in Egypt. You see it in Mesopotamia. You see it in other Semitic inscriptions where you have a deity with a combined name, where you see both divine names squished together. There will be like a little hyphen with them. Or when they become combined, you have a new name. So when Ra and Horus are combined in certain parts of ancient Egyptian mythology, it becomes Ra-Horakti, which is a somewhat different name. And sometimes you have a male and a female deity put together, and you have the two of them hyphenated. So, if somebody gets married and the wife doesn't take the husband's last name, they have a hyphenated name, you can say, hey, this is divine. This goes back thousands of
there
years.
You go.
You've got nothing to complain about. Even Adonai did this. Because if you go to Elephantine in Egypt, there was a Jewish garrison that was stationed there. They had their own temple. And when it was destroyed by locals, they asked for permission from Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And as far as we can tell, they got permission, but the locals prohibited them from offering animal sacrifices. They were only allowed to offer vegetable and fruit offerings.
Okay.
But there's a deity there called Anat Yahu, which seems to be a combination of the goddess Anat and a version of the divine name.
Interesting.
So at some point along the way, the two were, Adonai and El were combined, and you have the single deity who adopts the divine profile of both of them. And I think that probably happens around 1000 BCE, maybe a little after that, because I think it would have had to have happened early enough that by the time we get down to the middle of the 9th century, Hazael can be defeating multiple generations of kings in both Israel and in the southern dynasty of the House of David, who have Yahwistic theophoric elements in their names. So I think there had to be some time for these names to spread out a little bit among the leadership.
Interesting.
So,
well, there we have it. Like this name that is mentioned in these 10 commandments, it's not a direct and easy thing to track down. This is not obvious and clean cut. Nor are the commandments about it. But what does seem obvious to me is that several of these commandments that now all the children of Louisiana are going to be so familiar with, they weren't intended for children of Louisiana. It seems clear to me that they were actually intended for this ancient tribe. Like it was specific to them, even in that time frame. Wouldn't they have known that this is for them and not for other tribes, other people?
Well, you would think, particularly because the last commandment says not to covet don't covet your neighbor's wife, which means this is probably not aimed at women.
Yeah, right.
Much less children. This is intended for men, but it also says right after that, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant. Or to translate that into something we would understand today, don't covet your neighbor's slaves,
right,
or enslaved people. So this is coming in a time period where they presuppose that slavery is normative.
Yeah.
And I didn't think they were actually going to put that on there, but they did. So now we're also teaching the children of Louisiana that, your neighbor's got slaves.
Right. But don't covet them. It doesn't matter. Even if they have good ones, don't covet the slaves.
Yeah. And that's another problem we've gone over that problem before.
Yeah.
But
it's such a deeply problematic piece of legislation, and a lot of people are very keen on brushing off the problematic parts and just sort of saying, well, what's wrong with everybody? It's a good idea not to kill. Everybody can get behind the "thou shalt not kill" idea, and it's like, yeah, agreed. But I think most kids in school already got that one down.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, for all the people who insist that it's the parents' responsibility to educate the children about this stuff, they're the same people who are suddenly wanting everybody else's kids to be educated about not only this, but also the "I am the Lord thy God" part. That's imposing religion on other folks. But what baffles me is the same people who want this stuff up here are trying to get back into power a man who explicitly, proudly, repeatedly, consistently violates literally the majority of these commandments. Commits adultery.
He might have done it a few times, yeah.
Covets neighbors' wives.
Yeah.
Steals. Bears false witness.
Yeah.
About everything.
Constantly.
Like the dude lies about literally everything.
Yeah.
Doesn't honor the mother and father, doesn't keep the Sabbath day holy, does not refrain from taking the name of God in vain. And I would suggest that he also puts an awful lot of things ahead of God and worships other things.
Yeah. I think a strong case could be made in that direction. Absolutely.
We have no evidence that he has engaged in the ratzach, violated the "thou shalt not kill" command. So I'm happy to give him that one.
Okay,
but that's one.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny the way people want to talk about it. It's disingenuous in large part.
It's an identity marker. It's about trying to set up that stele in this space to claim that space for your identity, to say we are in charge here, we're in control, we're the ones who get to decide.
And to send the message to anyone who doesn't abide by this that they are less valued.
Yeah, you
and
don't
that
belong.
That this system doesn't, it won't serve them.
Right. It's not for them, it's for the other people. And so you can get in line or you can just be marginalized the whole time.
Well, there you go. I think our positions are pretty clear on this. For those of you who want to hear us chat more and maybe answer some patrons' questions and have some fun with our patrons, you can become a patron of the show. You will definitely receive early access to an ad-free version of every episode, and we have the after party bonus content every week if you're there at the right level. So please consider joining there. Patreon.com/Data Over Dogma. We would greatly appreciate it. It's how we pay our bills. And if you want to write into us, you can do so. You can write to contact@dataoverdogmapod.com. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Bye, everybody.